So here's something interesting. So I just got back from Lesotho and I was actually at the Lesotho South Africa border. I then remembered something really, really crazy that some people might remember, but some might not. The South African army once had to invade Lesotho. But before you get confused, there's a good reason why they had to. See, on the 22nd of September 1998, 600 members of the South African National Defence Force, who were later joined by 200 soldiers from Botswana, entered Lesotho to stabilize the situation for the purposes of achieving a lasting political situation to what was going on there. They were in Lesotho trying to prevent a mutinous bunch of soldiers of the Royal Lesotho Defence Force from staging a military coup in the country, or at least what was starting to look like one. Their objectives were to prevent a military coup, to disarm the mutineers, and to create a safe space and a stable environment for diplomatic processes and initiatives to find a peaceful solution to the political crisis that was raging in the country at the time. The intervention achieved all of these objectives, and Africa was spared from another military coup. However, in the first 36 hours after South African soldiers crossed the border into Lesotho, 48 people lost their lives in the capital city, Maseru. The city, as a result of this unrest, was severely damaged by the riotous mob. The mutineers offered a fierce resistance to the soldiers, and there were a large number of casualties. 8 South African soldiers and 40 mutineers of the RLDF lost their lives, and also 1 civilian. The cost of repairing the damage done to the city of Maseru after the political unrest was estimated at 2 billion rand or $350 million at the time, and until almost 2008, the effects of the political riots could be seen within the city. But obviously, we need to go back and find out where this all started. See, in 1998, Lesotho had been experiencing a political crisis following a rather disputed election. Allegations of electoral fraud led to widespread protest and instability in the country, with the faction of the Royal Lesotho Defence Force basically deserting and mutinying. The government of Lesotho requested intervention from SADC to restore order. South Africa, as a leading member of SADC, led the intervention force, which also included troops from Botswana. The intervention was aimed at preventing this potential coup and also stabilizing the country. However, the intervention was somewhat controversial at the time, with some critics arguing that it was an overreach on South Africa's part. Basically, we abused our power, that it didn't address the underlying political issues in the country. I don't know if that was on us to actually do. I don't know, maybe you think differently. Let us know in the comments. Lesotho's government was paralyzed at this time, and the country's Prime Minister, Pakalita Musisidi, feared that the administration would actually be toppled. And then over the course of the crisis, he sent 2 desperate letters to Nelson Mandela and several others to SADC leaders requesting a military intervention to try and stabilize the country because he could feel that he was losing ground. Now, Nelson Mandela was traveling in the United States while Lesotho was degenerating into chaos. Also, Deputy President Thabo Mbeki was also away, leaving Mangosuthu Buthelezi, the then Minister of Home Affairs, to deal with the crisis as acting president. Now, I have to state that some people believe that Nelson Mandela and Thabo Mbeki knew that the decision around what was going to happen in Lesotho would need to be taken, and Buthelezi was their man. He was the one who would action this decision. This obviously is on the conspiracy end, but I felt I needed to mention it because it is quite important. Buthelezi got approval from the regional allies to dispatch a SADC military force into Lesotho. There was also a growing sentiment throughout Africa that military coups would no longer be tolerated, and this was one of the reasons why we had to go in. Mandela and Mbeki were also consulted, according to Buthelezi. He says that they supported military intervention, but he also acknowledged that the final decision lay on his shoulders. Very convenient for the other 2 leaders, right? The central opposition figure involved in the 1998 Lesotho crisis was Letlohonolo Lenka, who was the leader of the Basotho National Party, the BNP. They were the official opposition in Lesotho at the time, and they disputed the results of that 1998 election. They were alleging that they had been electoral fraud. It was these claims then that led to the widespread protests and instability in the country, which ultimately prompted South Africa and SADC to intervene. One of the central questions around South Africa's army intervention in Lesotho that still remains unclear even till this day is if there was any formal SADC decision that actually authorized the Lesotho intervention. If such a decision was taken by SADC, it is unclear if it was actually authorized at a summit in Mauritius that was happening at the time, or if there was a ministerial meeting or even a meeting of chiefs of staff that allowed this. Maybe South Africa acted unilaterally. I don't know. What do you think? As no answers were available then and now, journalists and commentators speculated on all kinds of possible scenarios to try to also find answers of their own. Now, this resulted in a lot of theories, allegations. For instance, one of these is that South Africa wanted to incorporate Lesotho into South Africa so that it would have an unchallenged access to the Lesotho Highlands water scheme, which is really important for us. We need water. Actually, quick side note, if you didn't already know, South Africa, and in particular Gauteng, South Africa's economic heartland, gets its water from Lesotho through the Lesotho Highlands water scheme. Now, the scheme involves a series of dams, tunnels, and pipelines that divert water from Lesotho's Senqu River, or the Orange River system, to South Africa's Vaal River system. Now, to show you how massively important this Lesotho water project is, the project is actually being developed in phases. Just an estimated cost of phase 2 is around 32 billion rand, approximately $1.7 billion. And a reasonable estimate for the total cost of phase 1 was reported to be around 2.6 billion euro, roughly 17.5 billion rand at the time. Anyways, back to the story. It's also important to clarify that the 1998 events in Lesotho were not a coup in the traditional sense of a military overthrowing a government. It was more of a political crisis that was stemming from disputed election results that led to instability, looting, rioting, and this needed SADC intervention. Now, following the 1998 crisis and the SADC intervention, Letona Lelenka and the BNP continued to be a significant part of Lesotho's political landscape. I also must add that there were a few positive things that happened in the aftermath of this election unrest and from South Africa's intervention. 1. Political dialogue. The SADC intervention facilitated a process of political dialogue and negotiation amongst the various people and political parties in Lesotho, including the BNP. This dialogue was trying to find a solution to the political crisis and also to establish a more stable environment to operate in. 2. There was an interim political authority. An interim authority was actually established to oversee preparations for new elections. This IPA included representatives from all major parties, which included the BNP, the guys who started it. It was also to ensure that there was a level playing field for everybody. 3. Subsequent elections. Now, new elections were held in 2002 in Lesotho. Now, while the Lesotho Congress, or the LCD, won the major seats, the BNP remained a relevant political force in Lesotho. Lenka continued to lead the BNP for some time after these events. In essence, while the 1998 crisis was a turbulent period for Lesotho and for Lenka as a key opposition figure, it didn't result in his removal from political scenes. Instead, it led to a process of political reform and dialogue in which he and the BNP continued to still participate. It's also worth noting that Lesotho's political landscape has continued to evolve since then, with different coalitions and political shifts occurring. However, the 1998 events in Maseru were a significant turning point that shaped the country's political trajectory. To those who criticize South Africa's intervention, what other options did we really have? We also need to ask ourselves what would have happened if South Africa and the SADC task force had not intervened before the mutinous soldiers had actually declared a military coup in Lesotho. What would have been the implications to the people of Lesotho and for political stability in the country? What about democracy? What would the effect have been on the image of SADC and the African Renaissance in general at the time if a military coup was allowed to take place in Lesotho? What impact would have been felt in terms of investor confidence as well as the general economy and the well-being of the people? Actually, whether you are or against South Africa and by extension SADC's actions in Lesotho, try answering some of these questions. I want to see if my feelings around the topic are actually misplaced or not. The SADC intervention in Lesotho has taught us a number of very important lessons. Firstly, and most importantly, it has shown that a military operation of this nature can be successful despite a disastrous start. Despite all the strategic, operational, and tactical mistakes that were made in the authorization, conception, planning, and even execution in those first 48 hours of this operation. In the end, the operation succeeded in that it prevented an unconstitutional change of government in Lesotho. It also disarmed the mutinous soldiers. It restored overall law and order, and in so doing, created a stable environment in which political parties could resume dialogue. So yeah, that's the story around the day that the South African National Defence Force invaded Lesotho and why they needed to do so. I hope you found this interesting. Thank you for watching this video up until this point. Maybe check out one of these other videos and maybe they'll be just as interesting as this one. Cheers.